I'll say that again in the mic. Good morning. Welcome to day two of our community family wellness weekend. We had a good time last night, and today we get to continue learning about trauma. We have Helene Goble back again with us this morning, and we're excited to hear what she has to say. And we just want to open up with a word of prayer to ask God to be with us. Our theme is how faith, fellowship, and therapy can help build better families. Well, why do we have that as a theme? Because we are addressing the needs of not just our local community of believers, but the community of people that we interact with. So it goes beyond the doors of the church, it goes beyond our friends and family here, and we are reaching out to the community to give them all the tools that there are for them to be able to build a better life for themselves and a better life for their family. All right, at this time, we're going to acknowledge the Lord in prayer and ask God to be with us one more time. And I would ask you all that are here and online to agree in prayer as well. Dear Heavenly Father, God, thank you, Lord God. You said in your word, my people perish for a lack of knowledge, oh God. And today we're going to get knowledge, oh God. But we need you to open up our hearts, oh God, that whatever you have for us as an individual, we can see it and receive it, Father God. We ask that you would bless our speaker this morning, that you would give her utterance and understanding, that she would be able to convey these truths, these tips, these techniques to help us all be better as individuals. And Lord says the same, for your glory. We want to be better for you, and we want to help those that are in our community. So bless her this morning. Bless those that will watch, Lord God, those on the replay. May you get the glory. In Jesus Christ's most precious name we ask and pray. Amen. And as they say, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Helene Goble, marriage family therapy counselor.
Good morning. It's nice to be here. Appreciate all of your effort to be here. Sit in the right spot. It's kind of feedback. Last night, we went through quite a bit of information. In some ways, it was a little too much, but it gives the groundwork to be able to move forward with what we're talking about again today. So there will be some review, but I think when you review it or you hear it and we talk about it from a different angle, it sinks in a little bit better. So how does trauma affect our current life? Why does it matter today? What is going on now that is affected by 5 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago? So our overview for today is we're looking at the ACEs questionnaire and its limitations, because it does have limitations. And how does trauma affect our reactions? And reactions are that thing that happens when somebody says something to you, or somebody in your family does something. There's going to be a reaction. And usually those reactions can be followed back to a situation that previously happened. So how does it affect our reactions? Can it show up years later? Is this something that's possible? We talked a little bit about it, well, a lot about it yesterday, but kind of bringing it to what can we do about it? So how does trauma show up in our relationships? Because in our relationships is those little quick interactions of a comment or of a scenario or of a, do we turn right or left in the car, and something will come up. And you think, doesn't he ever listen to me? Or you might think, if it's the other, how come she's so picky? And it's not so much just that turning right or turning left, but it's years of other things that are stored in the bucket. So does processing improve our reactions? I would say A resounding yes, it does. And did we know previously, when I was growing up, did anybody teach us how to process? No. We were told, suck it up, be quiet, I don't want to hear it. One of my favorites was, you're going to cry? I'll give you something to cry about. And that was just a common way. It wasn't that people were being terribly bad or horrible. They just thought that that was a good way to get you to get back in, a behavior that was acceptable. And so they thought they were helping. But in so many ways, it was teaching us and training us from such an early age to stuff our emotions, to push it down, and to not let things show up and finish. And that right there causes a lot of reactivity, because if it hasn't processed, it's still there. And again, I brought my bucket so we can refer to that. So we can learn to thrive after trauma. And trauma, when I do my notes, when I'm at work and doing my notes, trauma can be a big T or little t. So a big T is maybe a horrific car accident or maybe sexual abuse. A little t can be those hurts, criticism, those things that are just little, but yet they build up and they store, and then we have that effect or that reactivity many years later. So to begin with, the ACEs questionnaire, we referred to it a little bit last night. It was designed by Kaiser and I can't remember the other person. They did, what they wanted to study was adverse childhood experiences, and they called them ACEs. And so it's plural, meaning the experiences. So it was to give people that were in the medical community an idea of what is going on for this family, what is going on with this kid, what is going on with this adult that might have diabetes or some kind of medical condition. Is there a correlation? And what they found out was that there was an effect in all walks of life, but that these adverse experiences, if they were high enough, could really affect our ability to be resilient. Because it's almost like you knock somebody down, and if you get so many knocks, that person's down. But if that person gets knocked, and we talked a little bit about those healthy relationships that we might have with a teacher, an aunt, one of our parents, somebody at school, if we can have a couple of those good, healthy relationships, it can strengthen and cause resiliency. So these things are not a done deal. It's not that just because you have a high ACEs score, it will automatically cause, some terrible physical ailment. It's not like that. There's a lot of variables. And that's the thing about this type of work. There's so many variables with people, with their brain. But again, it affects all different walks of life, all different nationalities. You could see it all over the whole world. The measure for the ACEs questionnaire has a 10-item measure. The original ACEs questionnaire had 8, and it wasn't enough. And so they altered it and came up with 10. And it's trying to measure childhood trauma. Now, 5 of them are personal and 5 are relational. And so those measurements, like I said, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, definitely could have some expansion. There could be some expansion in the questionnaire, and we'll talk about that. So trauma affects learning and future relationships. When you think about children going to school, if they have an ACEs score of 4 or above, it's going to be hard when they're sitting in that classroom setting to focus on the teacher or focus on maybe a project that they're supposed to be doing with their peers, because they're thinking about something that happened this morning, or they're thinking about what's going on in their family, and it's too difficult for them to address mathematics or reading some kind of a little paragraph and writing something about it. It's like furthest from their mind. They're preoccupied. And so when you think about how do those adverse childhood events affect a child, it can affect them when they're a child, and it can also affect them when they're an adult. When I worked in the school district, that was what was so frustrating, was that these children would come in, and they obviously had difficult childhoods. They obviously had difficult things going on in their family. And we were supposed to teach them how to behave correctly. And all that we were given as the tools we mentioned was cognitive behavioral therapy. There were other things that we could do, but that was supposed to be the best way to handle it. And so that cognitive behavioral therapy was really not working. And so they came up with another type. They called it trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. And it was this whole new thing we had to be trained in. We had to go for a whole week. We had to learn all about how to help kids with trauma. But it was still cognitive behavioral therapy. And remember, that was engaging that top part of the brain, the cortex. And so we would have them do these different packets and exercises and all these different things. And by the end of it, they were just probably a little bit more frustrated and felt like they wasted a lot of time. And it was frustrating for us because we were trying to help them. And so I would say, back in those days, people would say, how can you do this work? Back in those days, it was hard and it was discouraging. And I would come home either tearful or wiped out or depressed or, what are we going to do? I have this little kid. I have this family. I have this couple. I have this situation. I have this one that's, and they're just pile on. And they always gave us too many kids or clients. We always had way more than we could handle. But we were interns, so that's just the way it went, So at that point of that frustration and that really inability to be effective, that was when my curiosity peaked. And so if somebody was talking about something else, I would, what do you mean? Tell me more about it. And so we were looking at all different ways. The problem was nothing was really working. So trauma does affect learning with these kids and in their families. Then the moms and the dads get frustrated, and then they get in trouble. And so you're punishing something that it has nothing to do with fault. So here this kid is getting into so much trouble at school, boy or girl. And you know what they do? They learn to not trust adults. They learn that an adult, for one, doesn't hear me, doesn't see me, doesn't get me, doesn't really have any respect for me. I didn't sign up, if I'm the little kid, I didn't sign up for any of this stuff that's going on, and now I'm in trouble. So they just learn to and so you see that, they call it oppositional defiant behavior disorder. I think that's simply a reaction to not feeling heard, not feeling respected, not feeling understood. And so what I've seen with a lot of them is this. You're going to call me bad? I'm going to show you bad. And they become enraged inside. With good reason, right? Nobody's listening to them. Nobody's hearing them. Nobody's saying, I see what you're going through. Tell me what's going on. Nobody does that. They say, can't you behave yourself? Why are you always in trouble? And so these little kids grow up, and usually it happens around 12 and 13, 14. So that developmental phase of life for a child is something that we call differentiation. It's called individuation. You're separating from being a little kid into, hey, I'm a different person. I'm a different part of my family. I'm an individual. It's normal. It's part of that natural process of development. But if that kid is subjected to what I'm referring to as not hearing them, remember we talked about right brain, left brain. So if a parent or a teacher or a coach is very left brain and they're just punishing them and yelling at them and mad at them and not really seeing what they're going through, that kid is going to react with good reason. And they're going to dig their heels in and they're going to say clearly, you think I'm bad? I'm not trying to be bad. I've been telling you that for years. But you keep calling me bad, I'll show you bad. And so then they go. And then you think, what happened to that kid? They were such a nice kid. They were so smart. What happened to them? Right around 12, 13, 14, they go off the rails. It's because their nervous system, and maybe their parents or their teachers or coaches' nervous system is just, they're at odds with each other. So the damage is reversible. It's not easy, but it's reversible. Because when a kid grows up and understands that that pain that they went through, oh, now I see what happened. I was traumatized. I was reactive. I need to process that trauma. Now I can understand it better, understand my nervous system better. Remember, we talked about the hand where you can work through feeling something. Where is it showing up? Letting it finish. You could maybe get therapy for some of the big things that happen and really get those things cleared out. I personally had to do my therapy when I was about, I would say 50, 51 years old. And it was because when we're going through this master's program, they always recommend you need to get your own therapy so you know what it feels like. And I'm like, I don't really want to. So it happens, right? I don't want to. I don't want to go in there and talk about this stuff. I think it's better if we just leave it back there. You know, it was in the past. I don't really want to talk about it. I don't really want to bring it up. I don't really want to face it. I don't want to feel it anymore. I've done a pretty good job of stuffing it all these years. And so if I stuff it more, I think I can go on. But then you can't. After a certain point, it just keeps showing up. And really, I would have been better off if I did my work when I was in my 20s. But I didn't. When I was first saved, one of the things that was really, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday, was, you know, we don't want to be fleshly minded. We don't want to be carnal. We don't want to be act according to the flesh. And so I misunderstood that because I didn't understand I had all the storage. I misunderstood those sad or upset feelings as carnal or fleshly. But remember, it's a storage problem, not a spiritual problem. So when I would get mixed up about that, I would go to God over and over. Please help me. I feel ugh, or I feel reactive, you know, like upset or stressed or anxious. Do something, you know, help me. I don't want to feel this way. I don't want to be like this. But I didn't understand. It took many years later. But if I would have understood at that time and I would have addressed what was stored, I would have been able to let some of that stuff finish. Because the people that were involved were no longer involved in my life, but I still had the storage, right? And that's the hard part. But the damage is reversible. And so when I first started my work, I drove down this one street downtown and I picked a therapist way out of town, or out of where I live, because I didn't want to see anybody in their office at Rayleigh's or grocery store. I didn't want to see this lady anywhere. So I thought, okay, I'm going to pick somebody that specializes in trauma, and it's going to be far enough away that I won't have to encounter any of the people. So I pull down this street, and we have one-ways in downtown Sacramento. So you'd go down one street, and then the next street is this way. So there's connector streets, and you'd park. And so if you were coming from this direction, you would go down one street, park, and then you would get to where that other is by just walking there. So you know how it is, one-way streets. You can't go down the one that is on your address. So my address was a certain street, but I went down the one way, and then I turned right, and there was the office of my perpetrator. And I went, I can't do this. I was just sick, head to toe sick. And it felt like, how could this be that I didn't realize that address coordinated with, but I hadn't been down there for maybe 25 years, maybe more. I can't even do the math. I mean, it was a long time ago. I was probably 9 the last time I had been there. And at this point, I'm 51, so you do the math, not my specialty. So I park the car, and I'm head to toe upset, nauseated, not doing very well. Go up and then try to get through the intake, which I don't know this person, and it's not something I wanted to do. It's something that I've been avoiding, and I get through it. Well, I go about every 2 weeks to once a month for about maybe 4 or 5 months. I don't remember. She had a lot of trainings, and I always picked Monday because that's when her trainings were, so I could not have to go. I knew what I was doing. I didn't really want to do it. So we finally get to the point where it was the worst part of what I needed to process. And it was, I would say, as you practice processing something small, I always tell my clients, then medium, then we get to the big one. And the reason why is just like riding a bike. You don't get on a bike when you're 5 years old and get on a 10-speed. You get on something with training wheels. And then you take the training wheels off. And then you get one of those kind of medium-sized bike as your body gets bigger. And then you get a 10-speed maybe when you're in 5th or 6th or 7th grade, you know, a bigger bike. Well, it's the same thing with processing. You don't immediately go to the big thing. It just doesn't work that way. It wouldn't work very well. So we started small, went to medium, and then when I got to that thing that I just didn't want to think of, it wasn't that hard. My nervous system had already been prepared to feel it and let it finish. It already learned how to face something, allow it to be there, and let it complete. So when I got there to that thing, why have I been avoiding this all these years? So I processed it. Well, then as I was coming down that street that I mentioned 4 or 5 months later, and I turned right, I looked over, no reaction. And I looked at it hard, the door, everything, see if I could get a reaction, you know, because I wanted to get something, you know, like, because this was a big deal. And I looked, and I examined the door, the windows, things that I couldn't even notice before. And the rock, there was rock around it and everything. I thought, nothing. So I go in, I park my car, and I go up there, and I say, you know what, I think I'm done. And she said, I think you're done. So it's not something that has to go on forever. This is the problem with cognitive behavioral therapy. And when I referred to last night about the veterans that were committing suicide left and right with cognitive behavioral therapy or group therapy, it was because they weren't getting their need met, and they were going on for years like that. And if you go on for years with that full bucket and that rage and that upset, and then you go to therapy and nothing ever changes, there does come a point where it just doesn't make sense anymore. And so that's a very sad alternative, but I could understand that despair. I could understand how frustrated they felt. Now, for me, going through with cognitive, and I never did cognitive behavioral therapy, but I did it with others and felt the frustration. If I would have done that, I would have just said, this is dumb. And then why am I in this business? You know, why do I even try to do this? We're not really helping. Now, cognitive behavioral therapy will help if you have an empty bucket, because you're engaging the cortex, you're learning new skills, you're trying to change some behavior or whatever. It's great, but it doesn't help people with trauma, especially people with complex trauma, which is repetitive or very big, or, you know, like what we see in the veteran community. Okay, so damage, again, is reversible. After that time when I did my work, I just felt like something was lifted. And I didn't even know it was there because I had lived like that for so long. It just seemed normal. A lot of times people with really strong anxiety will not even understand what it feels like to not be anxious because they've always felt anxious. Or people with depression, a lot of times they don't understand what it even feels like to be bubbly and happy because they've never felt that way. It's just normal. So when those things change and our nervous system goes back into a balanced state or a neutral state, it's amazing. It's wonderful. It's helpful. I would say life-changing. So back to the ACEs questionnaire, for kids, it affects attention and decision-making when they have a high score, or even when they have a lot going on in their family. Maybe they have some ADHD and it looks like, you know, some hyperactivity or some distractibility. It's going to be hard for them to be able to sit in that classroom and pay attention and be able to make good decisions because their brain is busy. So, but remember, they're two different things. ADHD is kind of a brain thing, which I like to tell my kids at work, you have a superpower. This is a great thing. Your brain is powerful, but it does need some scaffolding. It does need some support around it because it is hard to plan and make sure you get things turned in on time. And remember that history book. And it is hard to remember that appointment or that thing that's going to happen at 10 a.m. Those things are difficult for that brain because the brain works a little bit differently. So what we do is not call the person, you have a disorder. You say, you have a superpower, and you just need to be able to have those things in place so that you can use that superpower. Now, I don't know if you know this much about the way the United States developed, but when you think about that, say for you it would be East Coast over here, right? I got to do it backwards. So East Coast, we settled there, and then people moved west. Well, guess what kind of people had the nerve and the guts to move west? People that had this type of brain. They're risk takers, they're people that think outside the box, they're people that are a little, see if we could try this, and the rest of the family is like, Dad, this is crazy, this is scary. Oh, it'll be great. So they go across the country, and guess what happens on the West Coast? You get a lot of people that are like that, and then they have babies, and then guess what? The West Coast is the West Coast. So they say that LA is really known for that. And it is, people that are very creative or very risk takers or whatever, they end up down there. We're up in Northern California. We're a little bit calmer. California is a very long state. So we're over here. It's very long. Well, LA is way down here. We're way up here. Just so you guys know. It takes 9 hours to drive down there, and we try to avoid it. No, it's nice down there. It's beautiful. But my point is that this type of brain is different, but it's not broken. And this type of brain is very creative and very enthusiastic. It could be impulsive, though. This type of brain can be almost too much of a risk taker and get themselves hurt. Or it could be willing to do something that nobody else has done. And so when you think about some of these people that have maybe invented amazing things or thought about flying to the moon or beyond, these are people that have this type of brain. Some, not all the time, but a lot of times. Then we have the autism spectrum, right? So the autism spectrum is where high-functioning autism a lot of times is our Bill Gates, our, maybe Steve Jobs. There's people that will think in a way that we could never even fathom to think about how to build a computer or how to make these different programs work. I mean, it just like, I told you about math. I don't know how to, do that. But some people, they can memorize long formulas and whatever. So that type of brain, it's not broken. It's just different. It's very powerful. High-functioning autism, a lot of times they're brilliant. Mathematically, musically, creativity, with creativity. There's a phenomenon there that we have to respect and not call it a disorder. So that's my personal bias is on my website I talk about how some of these things have been labeled as disorders. And if we can learn to respect, maybe it's our kid, maybe it's our nephew or our niece, maybe it's our sibling, respect that difference and help them with that scaffolding, they could, again, we're talking about thriving, really thriving. So I got off there, sorry. For kids, it will affect if they have a high ACEs score, attention and decision making. Long-term, a high ACEs score has been linked to chronic disease, employment challenges. Again, if somebody is preoccupied with things that have happened, and their brain is busy in the background, it's like if they were spinning plates. I don't know if you've ever seen somebody spin plates. They use big long sticks and they spin the plate and they've got all these plates spinning. You think, how could they do that? They're moving it and the plates are spinning. Well, sometimes that's what we are doing in our brain. We have all these things going on, some people more than others. And when they're doing too much, it can affect their ability to work or perform well in school or in their relationships, and we'll go a little bit more on that. Sometimes it will get kids in a lot of trouble, and they start out, getting in trouble maybe in high school, and it goes from there. Now, a lot of times when a kid has high ACEs score and they don't have what we talked about with those really strong relationships somewhere in their family, they will have difficulty with resiliency. But the opposite is true. If they have a couple of good relationships, if they have a couple of strong people in their life that they can really depend on and find refuge in, their resiliency increases. And so there's different ways to look at it. And again, I always like to stress the damage that happens and the things that we collect are reversible. And that was something that even in my master's program was emphasized, that that's really not what you would want to say to somebody because it might not happen. But I want to say, no, wait a minute. Now we know that we have this system of collection. Now we know that we have the ability to recognize it, allow those things to show up and complete. Why are we going to give people labels and things that say anxiety disorder, you know, or depression, or these things that label somebody and keep them stuck in that? If we can understand our nervous system better and allow things to finish, we don't have to keep carrying them around and collecting them for the rest of our life. So the damage is reversible. I wouldn't say that if I haven't seen it over and over and over and over again. Again, I am, you know, online, so there's a lot of things I wouldn't say online as far as specific cases, but I've had cases that, case after case, whether it's somebody that we talked a little bit last night about that had major surgery at birth, people that have been trafficked in sex trafficking rings, veterans that have seen horrific things, and children that have been sexually abused by their sibling or a step sibling, different things, all kinds of things that would just be something that you would think is, wow, that's a really tough one, that's really hard. And see that one have the thing show up, not at the beginning, but as we work through and finish. Now, children are very resilient. Sometimes I can have a kid that really doesn't understand the type of processing that I do and just have them draw pictures of what they've experienced. And then I'm right there with them. Tell me more about that. What is that like? What was it like when you walked in that doctor's office? What did you smell? What did you think when they said, oh, this isn't going to hurt, you know, it's just going to pinch? What did you think when it really hurt? What was that like? So I'm not trying to say, oh, and talk them out of it, which is what we thought was a good idea. It's not going to hurt that bad. Don't be a baby. You would actually ask them, what did it feel like? Did it really burn? Oh, that must have been hard. And sometimes that, just acknowledging what that little kid went through at the doctor's or the dentist, it can finish. But if we try to talk them out of their feelings, a lot of times it backfires. So the limitations of the ACEs questionnaire is that it's really missing addressing racism. It's missing the part that is, and I don't even know why it isn't on there. To me, it was like, how could that be missing? Bullying, how could that be missing? If you grow up with you know, something in your school or your environment and you're bullied, that's going to really affect your nervous system. It's missing surviving a major accident, maybe a car accident or some other kind of accident. It's not even on there. It's missing homelessness. If somebody has experienced homelessness, that's a huge factor in how they're going to be able to work through that in later. And it's missing witnessing other types of violence. So it does refer to maybe a father hurting a mother, but what if a mother hurts a father? What if a mother hurts one of your siblings? What if a father gets in a fight with an uncle or, you know, something, and you witness that? It's not on there. So there are limitations to the ACEs questionnaire. Also, it doesn't say anything about foster care. Now, foster care is something that when I have kids that have been in foster care, they have been through something that most of us would never really understand. Because when a child is born, their attachment to their caregiver is vital. It's essential to their well-being. So if they are put in foster care and that foster caregiver is only there for a brief time, or there's several foster caregivers, that little, you just think about that little human being and their brain and their nervous system is now reacting to this person, this person, this person, wait a second, and they can't bond because it's changing too much. Now, if it was one person, they would probably do a little bit better, but that's not how the foster care system is. They're moving around too much. Now, another thing that's fascinating about when a child is born, and this is something that I kind of have discovered over time but became really curious about, is when a child is born and they go into the ICU, NICU, we call it NICU, the NICU, what happens to them? They're separated, okay? And then the mom goes home and then comes back and goes home and comes back and goes home and comes back. Maybe she gets to stay there. But there's all these people involved in the care of that little one. So that little nervous system is looking, and I've been told they look for your hairline, and they look for your eyes, and there's something where that nervous system is trying to find markers or trying to find their person. And if it's constantly changing, even if it's for the first 14 days of life, it's tough. And so is that permanent? No, it's not. It can be processed. And I used to think, well, how could that be? Because they can't remember. The hippocampus doesn't develop fully until about 3.5 to 5. So somewhere in there, the hippocampus, that's where we have pictorial memory, and a lot of memory happens there. But if you're talking about these early days, why would it matter? They're too little. But that's not how our brain is. Our brain records all of it and stores it to keep us safe. So you'll see kids in foster care have a hard time attaching. You'll see them have that avoidant or inability to connect. Now, what do we do about that? We can process that early trauma, which I won't go into all that detail, but it's possible. And then we can create a very secure, healthy attachment. I don't know if you know that much about adoption, but a lot of times with adoption, they tell them to put the baby and strap them on there. Don't have company, don't have anybody over, and just stay really close to that kid for a long time, like 4 weeks or something. I don't know what they recommend, but it's not like a week. It's a long time. And you're basically shutting out all the nervous system material that kid is collecting, and it's just you. You know, you and maybe sibling and dad, mom, dad. So you keep it really, really close. And that little nervous system will reboot. And it's beautiful. So our nervous system is capable of a reboot. But if we don't understand it, and let's say that kid comes home from the NICU and there's never any understanding for the parents or to really do that long-term connection thing, then the kid just goes around and is basically struggling in their nervous system to attach. But again, it's reversible. So can trauma affect our reactions? We know it can. Adrenaline will activate the nervous system, and we know that that can feel really powerful. I mean, your muscles fill with that feeling. Goes down in through your body and through your legs and even into your feet. It'll feel like fight or flight or freeze. Freeze is that can't move feeling. It's almost like you can't speak, you can't move, you're in freeze. But it's also severe activation from something that's either stored or happening at that moment. Can trauma affect our reactions? Our prefrontal cortex, which is this part we talked about yesterday a little bit, temporarily turns off. It doesn't stay off, but it just temporarily turns off so that you can deal with the emergency. So if you had an emergency and this stayed on, and let's say it's a life or death thing, you would wonder if I should put that fire out, or should I go get the, well, maybe I should call 911. Maybe I should get the water. I don't know. I wonder if I should get a fire extinguisher. So your prefrontal cortex shuts off so that you don't do that. You just react. and you just do whatever. And so people have been asked later after something like that happens, how did you know what to do? And they'll say to you, I don't know. I just reacted. I don't know. It's just a mystery to me because I don't know what I was thinking. I just reacted. And so it's actually a mechanism for us to survive. And God knew what he was doing when he wired us. And I think so much of it, and just that point right there, God knew exactly what he was doing when he made us. He knew exactly about everything about us. So I'm not giving you anything new. It's just that in our Western culture, in our industrialized nations that we live in, they have tended to change us more into the cortex. You know, you didn't have, and this is hard to put into words, you didn't have this ability to feel something and let it finish because that's uncivilized, right? So we learned early on to stuff our emotions and be brave and strong and not think about it too hard. And so over time, we have learned to not work with our nervous system. Over time, we have learned to ignore when our stomach is upset or our heart is racing. We have learned that that's not important, you know. We go up into the cortex and try to analyze what's going on. But when that prefrontal cortex temporarily turns off, we need to know. We need to be aware of that. We can't think straight. Now, if you know you're in fight or flight, is it a good time to, and we talked about this a little bit, to have a discussion or make a decision? No, it's not. And if we have that awareness, then we can deal with that better than if we say, you know, and then, oh my goodness, you know, you find out that that decision was a really bad idea, or that comment was a relationship ending comment. So we can't think straight. We don't want to really trust what's going on at that time. We want to get ourselves back regulated so we don't blurt something or react in a way that is going to hinder our family, our relationship, our friendship, or even at work, right? So again, our brain this is so simplistic, right? It's very simplistic, but that prefrontal cortex part, which is here, we need that on. We need that to be working. And when it's turned off, it's usually because it's trying to keep us safe. Something in here has said, watch out. Or the event that's happening is so significant that you're in survival mode, so this goes off. The cortex is that part of the brain where we do our higher level thinking. That's great. It's wonderful. It's great even to make a change if you want to make a change in your life. But we can't go there to solve trauma. That's the wrong spot. We have to go to the midbrain in the limbic system where the material is stored. Now, our brainstem is interesting in that does things automatically for us. It digests our food. It helps our heart to beat. It helps us to sneeze if we have something in our sinuses or whatever. It helps us to do things automatically. But the brainstem is different than the cortex. The cortex is where you make choices. The prefrontal cortex is kind of our command center. So our brain has all these different jobs to do, and we are just barely able to understand the complexity of it. So this particular model here that I'm showing you is very simple. Brain scientists and brain surgeons know, all the intricacies. Now, there is a lot of work around this resiliency that our brain has, and it's amazing where people that have had even a stroke, if they're just left at a home or something to so-called rehabilitate, a lot of times they don't. But if somebody is really in their care and has a good relationship with them and works with them and knows how to help them to adapt to whatever, sometimes there's a regeneration that can happen. So some stroke victims get the help they need and some don't. There was a story, and it's a book written by Norman Deutsch, and he's a medical doctor, and him and his brother had a father that had a stroke, and his other brother was a neurobiologist or neuroscientist or something with neurobiology. And they two got together and said, we're going to do everything we can to help our dad. And that interaction, that intervention, that willingness to help him, that, you know, the dad knew they were on board with him, he was able to get rehabilitated. And so that got Norman Doidge to be extremely curious. Well, if we could help our dad, who else could we help? Are there people that are just being put to the side because they had a stroke or they had something happen, an accident? Is there a way to rehabilitate? So that particular content is a whole different topic, right? But it is amazing how much our brain can kind of work around some of these things that happen. And there is an amazing amount of resiliency in the brain. And that to me is super exciting. I have this, there's 2 books that Norman Doidge wrote. One is How the Brain Changes Itself and How the Brain Heals. And I was reading on an airplane and I got to like the 3rd chapter and I was like, oh my goodness, this is phenomenal. We're just getting started with all of this. This is so exciting. And I looked over at my husband and he's like, you know. And I'm like, I want to talk to him about it. But it was the airplane and it's just kind of hard to hear, you know. And he was reading something else or, you know, sleeping or whatever. And I was just like, oh, you know. So there is so much more that we can learn about this topic. The brain is, it's like a new frontier. You know, they say that there are synapses in the brain that are similar to all the stars in the heavens. You know, there's so many synapses and so many things going on that we don't quite understand. But for me, in the work that I do in my lowly office in Carmichael, I want to impart on my clients that there is a way to get better. There is a way to heal, and that's exciting. So can trauma affect our relationships? We know that a full bucket, let's say a lot of stuff happened in our childhood, and guess what? In their bucket, so we got 2 full buckets, yeah, it's gonna be tough. And that doesn't mean it's impossible or, you know, you throw in the towel, but you have to understand that if I have a full bucket that's getting triggered today and yours isn't, maybe you can have compassion on my bucket and we can work through it. Now, the next day or the next week, if you're triggered and I'm not triggered about whatever's going on, I'm gonna have compassion for you and be able to understand maybe this needs some support, maybe this needs some understanding instead of another disagreement or argument. You can step back and say, I wonder what's going on. Maybe it's a sibling, somebody at work. Maybe it's the guy next to you that's, you know, angry in a car. I wonder what's going on. Do I need to react to that? Or can I step back and, you know, kind of, ooh, you know, let that thing sort of calm down a little bit instead of be the one that reacts. So when we have a full bucket or someone else has a full bucket, when we see it this way, we can have a lot more compassion and a lot more awareness that, am I going to get sucked into this big upset? Or can I treat it with some compassion? So it's difficult with trauma because a lot of times we'll have an inability to self-regulate, especially with those that we love if we have trauma or big events with them. So it even could be a very close relationship, a sibling, a spouse, somebody that's your best buddy. You can have things that have happened that don't come up every day, but every once in a while they get touched. And remember that file system. It's like in a nanosecond, that file will come up and it's a big deal. And you think, wow. And so your brain will say, you know, you're really upset, you're really angry. Do we need to go with that? I think sometimes we need to challenge ourselves. Brene Brown does a lot of work. She's out of Texas, and I think she's a professor at some university. And some of what she does to me is genius, and some of it is kind of a little theatrical. But she has a lot of good things to say. But one of the things that I thought was genius is that she reminds us that when we have something happen, let's say it's Saturday morning and somebody says something and it really kind of upsets you, or, you know, in a conversation, our brain will do this thing that jumps. We call it jump to a conclusion. But the way she describes it is it jumps and it makes a draft. And this draft is like, oh, I know what they meant. I know what they're trying to say. And that draft is almost always inaccurate. She calls it something else, and I'm not going to say what she calls it. I'm going to call it inaccurate first draft. And that is exactly what it is. It's inaccurate. So at that point, we talked about that conflict resolution. Remember, part of a healthy way to resolve conflict is to ask questions and not assume. And so when you get that first draft, you can almost say, So instead of saying, oh, I know what she meant, you could say, whoa, my first draft is that you meant, this thing. And the other might say, oh, no, I didn't mean that. I meant this other thing. So then you get a second draft, right? Well, then you might have to ask another question or two. And then you get a third draft. And usually the fourth draft is where you get more of an accurate version of what's going on. Now, what if I stuck with my first draft and got super ticked off and stormed out or said, okay, fine, we don't have to, whatever. If I stuck with that first draft and trusted it, we'd be in trouble. Now, the interesting piece is our brain does that to survive. We can't survive. Remember that prefrontal cortex that has to snap off? We can't survive with a vacuum of not knowing. So the reason why we come up with that first draft is we have to know. We have to understand what's going on. So we make up something. We assume. Now, if you challenge yourself and in your relationships not to trust the first draft, don't trust the first draft. Ask questions. Find out what might be going on. Ask a question about, not what did you mean by that? That isn't what I mean. It's more about, okay, so what I'm hearing you say is da-da-da-da. Can you tell me more? That's less threatening, right? Yes. Then what did you mean? That is kind of, you're headed into, because then they're going to react to that facial thing. They're going to react to that, ooh, they're mad. And then they're going to have their bucket, and there you go. Whew, off to the races. But when you challenge that first draft and you ask questions and you do it, remember the voice, the soft answer turns away wrath, with softer voice, and you really, truly want to understand that other. A lot of times you'll be able to have a second, third, and fourth draft and actually find out what they meant. Now, if they meant that thing that you thought at the beginning, then you can have a discussion about it, but it doesn't have to be a volcano or, a big storm. So back to inability to self-regulate affects those we love. Sometimes we have to check our bucket with those that are closest to us. And those negative patterns will happen, but they don't have to stay there. We don't have to be stuck in those negative patterns. Those negative patterns tear away relationships. And that's why we have so much in the Word that teaches us to love one another. To Ephesians chapter 4, the last verse. Does anybody remember that one? Be kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another. And so those scriptures are there because they had the same problems we have. It's not like it changes a whole lot. I mean, there's been centuries, but still we have these issues with what we think, what really happened, and what are we going to do with it. And so those negative patterns can be there, but they can be changed. And so we don't have to have trust in that first draft. We can ask questions and get a second draft and have a better outcome. When we get into overwhelm, this is like duh. When you get into overwhelm, it's going to limit how the morning's going to go, right? Or that car ride, or that decision that you have to make. So when you're in overwhelm, again, it's not a time to make a decision. Go through those things that are going to help you to feel what you're feeling and let it finish. And it doesn't have to be like out on a hillside. It's not like that. I used to think this stuff was so dumb until I realized that when we can actually self-regulate, it's not dumb. It's pretty cool. It's pretty amazing to be able to work with our nervous system and not get stuck in those patterns and those cycles. So when we're in overwhelm, it's going to limit how you feel and how you think. So we don't really want to let a relationship get destroyed over overwhelm, because it's a storage problem, right? It shouldn't end the relationship. We just have a storage problem. Think of it in terms of storage. So also parenting from our experiences. I don't know how many times I've heard parents say, well, when I was a kid, my dad would, you fill in that blank. When I was a kid and I got a bad grade, this is what happened. And when I was this is what we did. So if we parent from our experiences, a lot of times it's not as effective. So sometimes we have to rethink how we're going to parent. And that's why we talked a lot about attachment yesterday. And that's why we talked a lot about those parenting styles. Because the authoritative, which is very firm and very clear, is going to be healthier for kids than authoritarian, which is very sergeant-like. So yes, we can still be firm and clear and godly and have good direction for our kids, but we don't have to go and whoop on them. It doesn't have to be that way. Now, there is the scripture about the rod and the staff and those things. I interpret that differently. I interpret it as the word. So we can use those godly scriptures of the word. Now, remember the woman that was caught in adultery. Did Jesus beat her? No. He used words with her to help her to come to the end of herself and be able to get help. Why should we be any different with our kids? Why should we think that it's a good idea to teach them to smack each other and hit each other? So I think the word is that rod. I think the word is that way to help them through something. Now, sometimes, if they're in danger, I probably would still, watch it, don't do that, but it doesn't have to be a beating. I think that is ungodly, and that's just my opinion, but I don't think it's helping our kids. I think it builds a lot of resentment, and they think it's very incongruent to what you're trying to teach us. We're learning about the love of God, and then we get whooped. And then we're learning about compassion and gentleness and love and all this, and then, what do you think? So what is going on there? We have to face that. We've had to work with our kids and say, if I could do it over again, I wouldn't have been like that. And oftentimes, one of ours says, you did the best you could. You were good. You did the best you could. And I said, I could have done better. I didn't have to let my frustration bubble over out of my bucket and cause you to also feel scared or upset. And so, sometimes there's some things that we have to do with our kids. We have to be aware of how our experiences are affecting our parenting. And sometimes, guess what? We can apologize. And it's not sugar-coated. It's not ooey-gooey. It's deeply say, I didn't know what I was doing was hurting you. I am so sorry. I love you, and I love you so much I would have done anything to help. But in those moments, I thought that I was helping, but I wasn't. I could tell that I was out of control. So misunderstandings can occur. Can trauma that I carried affect my relationships? Oh, yeah. And misunderstandings do happen. That doesn't mean we're stuck there. We don't have to stay in that icky, well, I was doing the best I could. Yeah, maybe we were doing the best we could, but we can repair, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So these little ones, as they overhear things, it embeds in their bucket. Those words that you think don't really affect them because they're little. There was a study done, and it was looking at a family, and it followed this family through. And what it looked at, there was a 10-year-old, a 6-year-old, maybe a toddler, and a baby. And they were studied because they were in a very violent environment. And so I don't know if they went into foster care or how they accomplished the study, but these kids were followed. And what happened with this study was that the one that was affected the most was the infant. Not the toddler, not the 6-year-old or the 10-year-old. The 10-year-old had quite a few good years. And so their computer system was embedded with, a pretty good family. It was okay. Maybe the next one, things started to get a little rough, and maybe it was a little harder for the toddler. But by the time the baby came and there was a lot of violence and screaming and all kinds of upset, that nervous system of that little one was the most affected. When we were asked in a training, which one do you think was the most affected? Most of us thought the 10-year-old, because they could understand the words. They knew what, they knew what all of these things were meaning. But it wasn't the 10-year-old. It was the baby. So that's how important it is for these infants to be in a nurturing environment and be able to meet the needs that they have so that they're not storing things from the get-go. Back to this model. Remember, it wasn't a model that is invented. It was only observed. And so in this observation, it was discovered over thousands of people that when we get stuck in defending ourselves and blaming the other, it doesn't work. It's not going to fly. You're never going to solve the problem, and you're just stuck in a loop, and it's endless. And this model of defend and blame, if we get stuck in that, which is really what we see everywhere, this is the norm. This is what everybody does. There always has to be a winner. And that one side is saying my point and you're wrong and blah, blah, blah. And the other one is not listening and making their point and you're wrong. And that win and lose idea is ineffective. So what he also observed, and we talked about this yesterday, is that when somebody had a conflict and he was observing their behavior, there was a very small percentage of people that started with a soft voice and asked questions. That's that generosity piece. What is it like for you? What are you going through? Why do you feel so strongly about that? I want to understand, not why do you feel so strongly about it? Why do you feel so strongly? I want to really get where you're coming from. Generous, okay? And then I added respect because I think that respect is missing in a lot of our dialogue in conflict. We see it everywhere. There's no respect. When somebody's in conflict, they don't have that, well, what do you think? Or why is this happening? Or, why is this so important to you? So that respect to me is very important. And what he noticed was those people that could show kindness, start soft, and have a generous way of looking at the conflict, were either able to solve it, which that's the point, right? They were able to solve it, or they were able to agree to disagree. And they were okay with that. Because there wasn't a lot of pride in that. There wasn't a lot of arrogance in that. In defend and blame, you'll see the pride kind of come up and the arrogance come up. And basically, you're just going to be on a hamster wheel. It'll just loop and loop and loop and loop. And you'll leave that interaction mad, irritated. You might be like, all day long. But you didn't solve anything, and now you have this wound between the two of you. It could be mom and son. It could be husband and wife. It could be friend and friend. It could be siblings. But that defend and blame model is what we see all over the place, and it's not working. When we have that soft approach, remember a soft answer turns away wrath. When we have that soft, gentle approach and we ask questions, we might not like what we hear, right? Because you're in conflict. I'm talking about conflict. I'm not talking about where we're going to have lunch. I'm talking about conflict. And when we have conflict and it's significant, there's a lot at stake. But when we have an approach that we're trying to keep it soft and we're trying to find out what the other is feeling and we have respect for them, we can agree to disagree and we can end that interaction with a healthier outcome. It doesn't have to be solved and perfect, but we are going to have a better outcome than if we resort to defend and blame. Now, defend and blame Um, oh, you didn't see that whole time? Oh, you did. I had two of them? Okay. Make that point, right? So when we defend and blame, we don't get anywhere, and it feels pretty bad, and we have kind of this sad, icky, anxious, not great feeling about it when we're done with it. But when we do the other, where we're kind and generous and respectful, you're not going to feel the residual, oh, I shouldn't have said that. You won't feel that because you're not in that brain state. You're not in that frame of mind. So, let me ask a question. Oh, sorry. Oh. Could I get water?
Certainly. So I just want to ask a question because I don't know if any of you all grew up like I did. Well, I do know some of y'all did. But we kind of grew up in a home where everybody kind of yelled at each other. We come from the place where people played the dozens as a way to communicate, which means if you say X about me and I'm like, I got to say X and Y about you, I got to one up you. And to hear, okay, be soft, with your answer. Wow, I don't know, if that was part of something that was cultivated in our homes and our relationships, and generation after generation will duplicate the method of communication and, in essence, the errors, and having those conflicts. I know a lot of people that have a lot of aunties that can't get along. They infight in the family, and I think some of this is what this is. They were taught the wrong way to address conflict. And my mind is like, wow, there's so much work to do to correct it. It's like going all the way back to the beginning and saying, okay, I know I talk with my sisters, my brothers like this. Now I'm like, wow, that's a lot to say, well, you disagree.
Yeah.
Now,
well, my
hey,
question,
bro, maybe we shouldn't do that.
Yeah. Well, my question would be, how's it working?
Yeah, it's not working.
Say. If it's working, keep doing it. If it's not working, make a change. So it's not that what we did, and we were yellers in our family, and, get upset and all of that. It was normal. But over time, it didn't work. Then we had those hurt feelings, and then we had those months where we didn't talk, or, something along that line. So how is it working? If it works and it's just animated conversation and that's just how you are, it's okay. If everybody's feeling heard and if problems are actually getting solved, but if they're not, maybe it would be something that you could shift. So, okay.
Because I'm going to forget this. You were talking about self-regulate and how when your bucket is full. I wanted to ask a question. Could that be the cause of certain panic attacks people have?
Exactly.
Okay.
So that's overload. And when you have anxiety and it's maybe at a 1 and you're used to it, and I actually know somebody that has this. They were just, I won't go into all of it, but it just an undercurrent of underlying anxiety going on with good reason. It was there for a reason. But then as it amps up and then you get in a conversation, a lot of times that anxiety will fly up into panic. So it is anxiety, and it is usually for a good reason, but it doesn't have to spin. You can get grounded. So there's exercises to help you when that feeling of like it's spinning to a 10 out of 10. You get yourself grounded in, let's say you're inside somewhere. You would look around for 5 things that are square. 1, 2, 3, 4. And so your brain is shifting gears to looking for things that are square. Then you look for things that are red. Okay, and you could pick any color. Okay, there's a fire extinguisher. There's some windows up there. Oh, that's quite purple. Oh, this is right. And so your brain is looking for things that are red. And then you might go to things that are circular, things that are yellow. And so you get your brain to shift gears and get grounded into right now. Because what panic is, and a panic attack, is you're spinning into the what if, or you're spinning into overwhelm. And it feels awful. In fact, it feels like you're going to die. Panic attacks truly feel like you have impending doom. That's one of the markers of a panic attack, is impending doom. And so that's going to feel like the worst you've ever felt. So it's not that it's, oh, it's a panic attack. No, it's pretty significant, and a lot of people go to the ER with a panic attack because they think they're going to die. But if you can get yourself grounded early on and do these grounding exercises to keep you in the moment, it'll help. So what she was saying is, we have a history of this. How can we change it? Well, if it works, keep doing it. If it's not working, do something different. So can trauma show up later? Remember, trauma is stored in your midbrain. Similar situations will warn you. Stored trauma can keep us reactive. We know these things. Your brain holds the information until it processes, and once it processes, reactivity will lessen. So then it will be easier for you to say to your sister or whatever that you have this long history of just blah, 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 blah. Then it'll be easier for you, because your bucket has emptied quite a bit, to say, you know what, this is a better way for us to interact. I don't really want to get into this with you. Let's do it a different way.
Okay, I got 2 questions, and I think we touched on some of these, but I'm going to bring it out just so that those that wanted this information would have an opportunity to hear you address it. One of the questions is, how can early identification and intervention be incorporated into family counseling practices to mitigate the long-term impact of trauma on our children?
How can it? It shifts the way you see it. It shifts the way you react to it. It shifts the way you will tolerate certain types of conflict or stressors in your family. So how, there's quite a few answers to that.
And I guess if I was that person, I would say, I know there are things going on, but I don't know how traumatizing those things are to my children. Mm-hmm. Should I be proactive, or should I wait for some kind of trauma response from my child to begin to address it?
No, you teach them very early, very much at the get-go, how to self-regulate, how to express what they're feeling, how to put something into words. And this was common. Just stuff it and put it away, because if we think about it, it's just going to make it worse. No, if you think about it, it'll finish and it won't store. So the benefit is teaching them how to self-regulate, how to work through strong emotions so that it doesn't go into here.
So let me model that, and then you can kind of give me, because I have in my mind what I think that looks like, and then you can kind of correct me. I'm not getting a private counseling session. All right, so I feel upset. Something is happening. I feel like I'm real shaky now. Maybe this is like the onset of a panic attack, or somebody has done something, and I'm on the inside. I can feel myself amping up. Mm-hmm. I'm not listening to the person. I'm not, but I feel myself just on the inside getting very agitated. I'm starting to breathe faster. You said earlier, okay, I'm looking for squares, looking for things. I'm trying to do things.
If you're in an interaction with somebody, you would say, I need a timeout. I need to go, maybe just go to the bathroom. I need to get away from this. So you're saying, just a minute, I'll be right back.
Okay.
Just a minute. This is not working for me right now. I need to go to the bathroom. So you're in the bathroom.
All right.
You're like, I feel so. So you're going to pause, because you notice that you're feeling really strong. breathe. Remember the second step. You're going to identify anger, maybe we'll call it anger.
Okay.
And where is it showing up? My heart is racing and my stomach is flipping. Okay, so you might even put your hand there. And then you say to yourself, I'm not going to stuff it. I'm not going to pretend it's not there. I'm just going to breathe it like I'm catching a yawn or a sneeze, and I'm going to go, it's all right, ticked off. I can't believe they said that. Oh, man, really? You know, and so you're breathing, you're acknowledging, this is what I'm mad, I'm upset. And so then guess what? The prefrontal cortex will come back on.
All right.
Okay, and then maybe then you can do, okay, I see some squares, I see some red. I'm going to shift gears now. But you have to feel that feeling and let it finish. You can't pretend it's not there. So the grounding is kind of when, when you're spinning, but you also want to acknowledge what it is that you're feeling, where is it showing up, and letting it be there for 15 seconds and finish. So maybe it's 30 seconds. Maybe it's 40 seconds. Maybe it's 10 seconds. It depends what it is and who you are and what that thing, how it's affecting you.
So another example. Here I am. I grew up maybe with an abusive father, you know, and he would terrorize us, and, you know, we're just very fearful. Now, as an adult, I feel like my boss is just telling me what to do, and maybe he's gruff, you know, just, I need that report right now. And, you know, I'm quitting jobs because every time I see something in a boss that reminds me of my father, I'm like, I'm out of here. I don't have to take this. I don't, you know, and I look like the person who, well, my bucket is overflowing. I don't have to take this. You don't appreciate me. How I would regulate that would be to say, Crystal, he is not your father. You know, he talks to everyone like this.
But, Crystal, you would say, that made me feel dismissed or criticized. You would acknowledge, you're not going to talk yourself out of the feeling. That's what we did wrong.
Okay,
Don't talk yourself out of the feeling. Feel it and let it finish. So it's almost like you're not going to tell that feeling if it's anger, go away. You're going to say, I have it. I feel angry. Jesus was angry in the temple.
Yeah.
I have it. It's okay. Acknowledge it. It'll finish. So the trick is not necessarily to talk yourself using the cortex out of an emotion or to try to talk a kid out of an emotion. You just let them be with it for 15, 20 seconds.
Okay. Okay. I had that wrong. Thank you. You allow it.
You allow it.
Allow it.
Give it permission.
And that's kind of hard for people who are trained. Be not angry. You know. Okay,
but
I didn't like it.
Be angry and sin not.
Thank you.
Be angry and sin not. Now, we can be angry and let it finish and not sin. But if we take that anger and just stuff it away.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't like it. He was so wrong. I'm letting it. I'm letting it process. I'm letting it go.
Acknowledge, feel it, allow it, give it permission. Now, I have a thing. I don't know if you guys ever saw Frozen.
Yeah.
Okay. Picture her walking up that mountain, and she's going to let it go, right? And she tells the story in the song about, you know, I have all these feelings, and I'm going to let them go. Well, she was in her cortex. She didn't let anything go, because when she got up into that castle, she was throwing ice daggers at people that came in there. And she made an abominable snowman to kill her sister. I mean, she didn't let anything go. It didn't finish. It was stuffed, and she was thinking about it with her cortex. Let it go. Well, if she would have let it go, her sister would have come in and she would have said, I'm sorry, you know, I'm just really afraid. That's what would have happened if she actually let it go. So let it go can be an intellectual exercise in the cortex, which is kind of like that cognitive behavioral therapy that doesn't work. or we can actually allow an emotion to show up and finish and complete. It's allowing the process to, like I said, catch a yawn. If you don't catch it, but if you catch it, it finishes. If you catch a sneeze, it clears out whatever's in your nose. If you catch that emotion and let it finish, it doesn't store.
All right, another question. It says, sorry, I'm nearsighted. Yesterday you mentioned how we feel trauma in different parts of our bodies. Is there something to be said about why we feel trauma in a particular area of the body? Mm-hmm. For example, seeing trauma build up in the form of your stomach or your chest. Is that indicative of anything?
Everybody has their spot. So I'll have clients come in and they'll say, I feel it in my chest again. That's just their spot. A lot of times it's stomach. Sometimes it's head, back of the neck, shoulders. It can be wherever it shows up. You don't have to analyze it too much, but know that it does show up there. So there's a whole weekend we could go over how trauma stores. Peter Levine wrote Waking the Tiger, very good book. Bessel van der Kolk wrote The Body Keeps the Score, very good book. And these are talking about how when we have something happen to us, it stores in the body and it'll show up in, like you said, Crystal, stomach, chest, throat. Sometimes if we had something that was very sad happen, we'll feel our eyes burn and our throat constricts. So these are normal reactions. It's not that you're weak or that you're carnal or that you're, somehow a bad person because you're, people always say, sorry. Well, there's nothing to be sorry about. You're just feeling something. Just be okay with it and let it complete.
All right. This question asks this question. This question says, are there any resilience building practices that can help us better navigate the impact of trauma in our lives? So we got the hand. Pause.
Simple. But this will build resiliency. This will build an ability to handle the new stuff and the old stuff when it shows up. And you're working with your nervous system to let something show up and complete. Super simple, but very, very powerful in your ability to handle new stuff and to handle the old stuff. So it really doesn't get any easier than that. But to have an awareness that something's happening and work with it instead of stuffing it is a game changer. It really changes so much about conflict and about our emotions.
All right, I think I can answer this one based on what you said last night. So tell me if I get it right. So they're asking about how they're constantly trying to change and improve themselves. And they're concerned with how other people are viewing their progress if they're not seeing it or validating it. And I think that's when you did this thing with your hand and you said, boundaries. Close the circle, right?
Close your gate.
Close the gate. You close, you continue to do the work on yourself, and this is not the time to focus on what they're saying. Yeah. It's the time to focus on what you're doing.
It's their job to think what they think. That's their job. Your job is to do what you can do. Now, if your gate is open and they throw a grenade in, it's going to land inside and you're going to be like, oh, man, I can't believe it. But if your gate is shut and they say, you're not perfect, or something about, this work that you're trying to do, you're not this or you're not that. You say, well, I'm doing the best I can. I'm trying to improve this part of me or this thing that's going on. But I don't need a grenade to help me to see it better. Okay, so you keep your grenade and I'll keep doing my work and we'll move forward.
All right, well, one more question. So this is going back to how trauma can be reversible by emptying out the midbrain. So that looks like, here I am, I'm triggered, and I process the emotion, the hand thing, and I let it go. But the more
Let
I
it
practice,
finish.
let it finish.
Mhm.
The more I practice it and let each item go, I'm actually emptying out the midbrain. Is that correct?
It depends if it's something that's triggered from your past or it's happening right now. But you are retraining your brain to handle conflict and struggles and emotions differently. The synapses are going to change. It's going to get easier and easier and easier. Because as you train your brain and it makes new pathways, those pathways in the brain will automatically go to pause, instead of like, I can't believe it, you just go into that mode. Well, now you will have a mode that your brain has said, well, wait a second, that doesn't work so well. I'm going to do this other thing. I'm going to pause and breathe and work through it.
All right. Awesome. Awesome. We've got like a minute or two left.
Okay.
What would you leave us with from this
See if I
section?
can go through. There was some pieces about, um, yeah, let's go back to here. So can processing improve our reactions? What we talked about, it will normalize this. This is normal. And we don't have to take it with, oh, I'm a terrible person, or I'm broken, or something's wrong. It's just how our nervous system works, and it's normal. We can be aware of our reactivity, and that can be a big help, just to have an awareness of it, because then we're normalizing it, and that we can work with it. Attachment issues are clearer if we have an attachment problem with somebody in our family. That attachment issue could be, you're actually made more aware of it, and it's easier to deal with. We gain insight, and integration will occur. Remember, we talked about the right and left brain, and that when we have integration happening, that's when we're using our whole brain, and we can have access to all the parts of it, and it'll work better that way. And our nervous system will work much better. We'll have those synapses that will create those pathways where we don't have to go there to that big volcano mode or that deep depressive mode. We would be able to have a better ability for that. So family, we're going to have stuff that happens. Fights are part of it, but that repairing is going to be where we want to focus. So with after trauma and we're working through it, we're going to have less reactivity, less adrenaline and cortisol. Relationships are improved with repairs. You're teaching your children and those that you love that you can make a repair and be humble. You don't have to have that deep hurt and just ignore it. You can actually have a repair, and it strengthens the relationship. So reactivity isn't a spiritual problem, it's a storage problem. And so when we see that, we can treat it differently. We can work through it like, yeah, I have this thing. You go to the dentist, you get a cavity filled. You go to the doctor, you get glasses. You have something wrong with your ears, you get, repair. In our emotions, we have to see it as a storage problem and be able to resolve it that way instead of, I am broken and I am a bad person. You also gain compassion for others through this type of awareness. And again, we can have those connections that are healthy, that are strong, that are helping our children to learn resiliency. So again, repairs strengthen relationships, hope increases. Your walk with God isn't defined by your storage. And that to me was a huge relief, huge relief. You're better able to pray more often and with clarity because you're not sidelined by some emotion that keeps you like, oh, well, I'm kind of, in a place where I can't really pray through. Pray. That's our access to the grace that we need. So when you understand this system and the ability to let something show up and finish, you're praying a lot more often because this isn't in the way. And those labels of, different things are not in the way. So we're also modeling a healthy lifestyle. So you said, how can I change this relationship maybe with a sibling that's an adult? You're going to model something different, and it's going to be powerful. And then it also prevents further trauma, and that's our goal, right? We're trying to prevent that ongoing thing that happens that we pass down. And I had some pieces in there, Brother Arnold, about epigenetics and some of the pieces that is definitely a part of what we're looking with all this. But some of that can be thwarted by the changes that we make and even changes in our lifestyle. So these are some of the resources that I looked at. The long-term impact of adverse childhood experiences is an article that the Amen Clinic wrote that really explains it and gives you some insight about maybe some different dimensions about it. I thought that was really a good article. There's also the things about Gottman that we talked about, and The Body Keeps the Score is another thing that I mentioned would be helpful. And Peter Levine's Waking the Tiger. I didn't put that one up there, but that one's really good. And again, thank you for giving me this opportunity.
For those online, we invite you back this afternoon to hear from Dr. Mosley. She is a psychiatrist, and she will be talking about mental health. As I mentioned earlier, this is for our community, not just for in our house, and we want to provide all the tools that are available. Thank you for joining us. Please come back this afternoon. Oh, you're too kind. Oh, you're too kind. So, our next phase of